Ancient healers and the silent birth of medicine, a night journey through early human care. Before medicine had white coats, charts, or machines that hummed reassuringly in sterile rooms, it lived in quieter places. It lived in the hands of people who woke before sunrise, who listened closely to pain, who learned by watching bodies fail and sometimes recover, and who carried the weight of uncertainty without the comfort of explanation. In the ancient world, healing was not a clean profession. It was intimate, exhausting, and deeply human. To be a healer was to stand at the edge between order and chaos, between hope and inevitability, knowing that every decision mattered even when knowledge was incomplete. This was not ignorance disguised as confidence. It was responsibility accepted without illusion. In civilizations like ancient Egypt, healing began before daylight, not because doctors were disciplined heroes, but because suffering does not wait. Fever does not check the time. Broken bones do not pause out of courtesy. Birth arrives when it chooses. The healer rose early, not energized, but committed, aware that the day ahead would involve blood, fear, frustration, and the quiet expectation that they somehow make sense of it all. Cleanliness mattered deeply, not because germs were understood, but because order itself was sacred. To wash one's hands was to push back chaos, to reassure both patient and practitioner that the universe had not yet slipped entirely out of control. The ancient doctor occupied an awkward space in society. Respected, but never powerful. Trusted, but always watched. When treatment worked, the healer was skilled. When it failed, the gods had been offended, and the healer was suspect. This tension shaped everything. Confidence was not arrogance, it was armor. Patients needed to believe that someone knew what they were doing, even when certainty was impossible. Calm voices reduced panic. Rituals soothed fear. Words mattered as much as tools. Those tools were simple by modern standards, but they were not random. Copper blades, linen bandages, wooden splints, jars of honey, resin, herbs, and oils lined the walls. None of these were symbolic decorations. They were the accumulated results of observation. Honey, for example, worked. It reduced infection. Wounds treated with it healed more often. No one knew why, but medicine has never required understanding before application. Results came first. Explanations followed centuries later. This is how progress actually happens. Patients arrived carrying the ordinary injuries of working societies. Broken arms from lifting too much, cuts from tools, burns, infections that began small and turned dangerous. Bones were honest. They broke clearly and predictably. Setting them was painful, unpleasant, but satisfying. A clean fracture meant hope. The healer pulled, aligned, bound, and trusted experience. No apology was given. Apologies invited doubt. What mattered was steadiness. Other cases were quieter and more dangerous. Small wounds that hid infection. Eye injuries from dust and sun. Stomach illnesses from bad food and worse water. These required patience. Wine cleaned wounds. Honey sealed them. Herbs calmed swelling. Spells calmed minds. Fear made bodies tense, and tension slowed healing. Magic and medicine were not rivals. They worked together because both addressed different parts of the same problem. One treated flesh. The other treated belief. Some patients arrived without clear symptoms. Fatigue. Strange dreams. A sense of imbalance. These were the most difficult cases. When nothing obvious was wrong, explanation became as important as treatment. In these moments, healers leaned on ritual, prayer, and reassurance, not because they lacked skill, but because humans need meaning as much as medicine. A charm carried hope. Hope changed behavior. Behavior changed outcomes. Even today, this remains true. Children frightened healers the most. Fevers in children were unpredictable and unfair. Treatments were gentler. Voices softer. Instructions repeated carefully. Parents watched every movement, measuring trust with their eyes. These cases lingered long after the child left. Healers carried them home in silence. At the end of each day, after washing hands countless times, Ancient doctors did something revolutionary. They wrote things down. Not poetry, not philosophy. Observations, symptoms, outcomes. What worked, what didn't. This quiet habit mattered more than any ritual. Knowledge survived because someone recorded it instead of rushing to the next emergency. Medicine advanced not through brilliance, but through consistency. This same human logic extended beyond healing into identity itself. Long before documents or uniforms, the body spoke for the person. Hair, in particular, became one of humanity's earliest languages. In ancient societies, hair was not decoration. It was information. It announced status, discipline, belonging, and control. To change hair was to change how the world treated you. In ancient Egypt, hair was architecture. Most people shaved their heads and wore wigs. This was not vanity. It was order. The wig replaced natural chaos with symmetry and control. The quality of the wig announced rank immediately. Priests shaved entirely to remove earthly disorder. Pharaohs wore stylized hair and false beards not to look human, but eternal. Children wore side locks that marked dependence. When cut, adulthood began. Hair was never personal. It was performance. Among Vikings, hair told a different story. Long hair and beards suggested strength, maturity, and honor. Archaeology reveals combs everywhere, evidence of careful grooming. Braids were practical and symbolic. Hair was cleaned often. This was not wildness. It was deliberate identity. Foreign observers exaggerated Viking appearance to mark them as other. Vikings understood this and sometimes leaned into it. Hair became intimidation, reputation, psychological warfare. To cut a warrior's hair was humiliation. To style it before battle was preparation. In Rome, hair was political. Short, controlled hair meant discipline and citizenship. Excessive styling suggested decadence. Beards shifted meaning with cultural influence. Women's hair signaled marital status, wealth, and morality. Elaborate hairstyles required time, servants, and imported hair. Visibility invited judgment. Hair could elevate or destroy reputation. Slaves were cropped. Criminals shaved. During crisis, Romans let hair grow wild. Order returned when hair was cut again. In Japan, hair reflected discipline and continuity. Long hair suggested refinement and lineage. Cutting it without rituals signaled rupture. Court women wore hair so long it proved insulation from labor. Buddhist monks shaved their heads as visible renunciation. Hair marked alignment with society or withdrawal from it. Quiet control mattered more than display. Hair reflected inner order. Because hair carried such meaning, altering it became a tool of power. Shaving captives erased identity. Cutting women's hair punished morality. Forced removal extended shame through time. Rebellion reversed this logic. Refusing approved hairstyles became resistance. Mourning disrupted grooming because grief shattered internal order. Hair mirrored the soul's condition. Across medicine and identity, the same truth emerges. Ancient people were not foolish. They were working with limited tools, learning slowly, observing carefully. They built systems of care, meaning, and control that allowed societies to function long before modern explanations existed. Trembling flames, casting long shadows on stone walls, and the healer remained alert, listening for changes in breath, for fevered murmurs, for the subtle signs that life was either returning or slipping away. There were no alarms, no machines to warn of danger. Awareness itself was the instrument. Experience trained the senses until even silence carried meaning. A patient sleeping too quietly could be as worrying as one restless with pain. In this fragile darkness, medicine was less about action and more about watching, waiting, and accepting uncertainty with discipline. What separated ancient healers from superstition was not knowledge, but restraint. They learned when not to interfere. A wound disturbed too often healed poorly. A fever fought aggressively, sometimes worsened. This wisdom came slowly, through loss. Every mistake stayed with them. There was no system to absorb blame, no hospital to dilute responsibility. Each failure carved memory deeper. Over time, This produced caution, humility, and respect for limits, qualities modern medicine would later rediscover under different names. Communities depended on these figures not because they promised miracles, but because they provided structure in moments of fear. When sickness spread, panic could collapse order faster than disease itself. The healer's calm presence slowed that collapse. Even when cures failed, explanation mattered. Naming a condition gave shape to fear. Ritual gave timing to chaos. People could endure suffering more easily when it felt contained within meaning. This same logic applied to the body beyond illness. The way one stood, walked, dressed, and groomed signaled whether life was in balance. Hair left uncut too long suggested neglect, grief, or disorder. Excessive decoration suggested insecurity or moral decay. Ancient societies read these signs instinctively. No words were required. Appearance became a shared language that maintained cohesion when speech failed. Over centuries, these quiet systems laid foundations no one could yet recognize. Observation turned into records. Records turned into patterns. Patterns became principles. Principles eventually became science. But science did not replace the ancient mindset, it refined it. The core remained the same. Notice carefully, act cautiously, respect what you do not yet understand. As the fire dimmed and the world outside fell silent, ancient people surrendered themselves to rest, trusting that morning would bring clarity. Some would wake healed. Others would not. Life continued regardless. Progress did not arrive in dramatic breakthroughs, but in small improvements repeated patiently across generations. This is how humanity moved forward, not through certainty, but through care practiced consistently in the dark. When control was broken, whether by force or by choice, it revealed something ancient societies feared most: how fragile social order truly was. Stability depended not only on laws or rulers, but on visible signals that everyone understood without explanation. Among the most powerful of these signals was hair. In the ancient world, hair was never neutral. It was a language. It spoke before words were exchanged, before questions were asked, and often before judgment was consciously formed. Hair marked a person's place in time. Childhood, adulthood, marriage, authority, decline, and death were all written directly onto the body through hair. In societies without birth certificates, identity cards, or formal records, hair acted as a living document. One look could reveal where someone stood in life and what was expected of them. Children's hair was treated differently from the beginning. In many cultures, it was left loose, uneven, partially shaved, or marked with symbolic locks. These styles were not about beauty. They communicated dependency. A child was incomplete, still forming, still under protection. Hair made that status visible. The moment it changed, the child's relationship to the community changed with it. Coming-of-age rituals almost always involved hair. Cutting, shaving, braiding, or restructuring it marked a threshold that could not be crossed twice. This act was rarely private. It was witnessed, remembered, and socially binding. Afterward, expectations shifted. Responsibility followed appearance. The individual was no longer spoken to as before. Hair confirmed that time had passed. Marriage produced some of the most dramatic transformations, particularly for women. Loose or youthful hairstyles gave way to bound, covered, or controlled forms. These styles announced loyalty, sexual exclusivity, and absorption into a household. They also functioned as boundaries. Certain questions were no longer appropriate. Certain freedoms were no longer assumed. Hair communicated all of this silently, avoiding confrontation while enforcing structure. Men experienced age through hair as well. The beard carried immense symbolic weight. A beardless man was often viewed as unfinished or untested. A full beard suggested authority, endurance, and legitimacy. When hair thinned or turned gray, it signaled experience and proximity to wisdom or decline, depending on the culture. Age announced itself without explanation. Old age sometimes brought deliberate simplification. Elders withdrew from visual competition. Hair was allowed to grow naturally or left unadorned. This was not neglect. It was acceptance. Identities softened as time narrowed. Even death was anticipated through hair. The elderly might cut or arrange it differently in quiet preparation. Mourning was expressed through altered hair, mirroring rupture and loss. Once again, hair tracked life's deepest transitions. Across cultures, hair functioned as a living timeline. It changed when roles changed. It made time visible on the body. In societies without clocks or written records, hair helped everyone understand exactly where someone stood in the long passage of life. Hair also defined belonging. Long before accents were heard or customs observed, hair announced difference. Length, texture, color, and style marked outsiders immediately. Greeks and Romans often described foreign peoples first by their hair. Too long, too wild, too decorated. These descriptions were not neutral. They framed others as excessive, undisciplined, or dangerous. Fear worked both ways. Foreigners entering new lands were pressured to alter their hair to survive. Assimilation often began at the scalp. To keep one's native hairstyle was to invite suspicion, exclusion, or violence. Hair became a visual border. Conquerors understood this power instantly. When empires expanded, they imposed hair rules deliberately. Forcing people to abandon traditional hairstyles weakened cultural memory. It erased continuity between generations. A child who no longer wore their people's hair no longer fully carried their identity. Resistance clung to hair stubbornly. Even when language, clothing, or religion changed, hair often remained untouched. It was harder to legislate and slower to erase. A braid or not preserved ancestry in plain sight. Hair also shaped fear and admiration. Warriors were described as terrifying partly because of how they wore their hair. Over time, hairstyle itself became shorthand for threat. Yet fear often turned into fascination. Elites adopted foreign hairstyles once dominance was established. What began as fear became fashion. In ancient societies obsessed with order, hair drew the line between us and them before a single word was spoken. When ancient people looked at hair, they saw past and future layered together. Hair carried memory. It preserved traditions long after rulers fell and borders shifted. Parents styled children's hair as they had been taught. Elders corrected deviations. Memory passed through hands, not books. Hairstyles often outlived the cultures that created them. Even after conquest, certain rituals remained. To outsiders, they looked like habits. To insiders, they were anchors. Hair stored personal history too. Scars, texture changes, uneven growth told stories of illness, loss, survival. Cutting hair sometimes meant letting go of memory, which is why it was delayed. In some traditions, hair was preserved after death, kept, buried, or treated ritually. It was believed to retain part of the self. Identity lingered in strands. Most strikingly, ancient people rarely spoke explicitly about hair. Its meanings were understood without explanation. That shared understanding gave it power. Hair was never just decoration. It was control, memory, belonging, and time itself, growing silently, shaping identity one strand at a time.